The Jews had handed Jesus over to Pilate that Pilate might execute him, because they didn't have the legal right to formally execute a criminal. And the charge that they bring against Jesus in the first instance is that this man is causing trouble. He is raising up an insurrection, an army against Roman rule. And so Pilate has quizzed him, asking, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered him, "Are you speaking for yourself about this, or did others tell you this concerning me?" Which is really saying, have you discovered in your role as Roman governor any evidence of me raising a rebellion against the Romans? Surely, if I'd been speaking against Rome, you would have heard about it by now. The Romans had their centurions in all the major centres throughout Israel. So Jesus asks, are you asking this question because you've heard something about me? Or are you just responding to hearsay of what others have said? To which Pilate responds, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me. What have you done?" He hadn't heard any bad reports concerning Jesus. Jesus was before him because the Jewish authorities had referred him, and he wanted to know what was the basis of the charge. How have you upset your own nation and your own people? Well, Jesus comes back to the claim, "Are you the king of the Jews?" and says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight, so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here." He doesn't deny that he is king, but he says that his authority as king does not come from the administration of the world. The world has placed Caesar in control, Pilate in control, and Jesus is not a threat to them. So at the present time, Jesus has no political authority. But yes, technically he is a king. He was born in the royal family, and at Joseph's death, he was the one who should receive the kingdom, if in fact the royal family was ruling. So Pilate says, "Are you a king then?" And Jesus answered, "You say rightly that I am a king. For this cause I was born, and for this cause I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." I'm reminded of Zechariah's prophecy, where the Messiah is presented as the shepherd who comes to the poor of the sheep, and teaches them, and they receive him. So Jesus came, teaching the people the way of righteousness. But in that prophecy, the other shepherds rejected him. They are identified as the shepherds who do not care for the sheep, but only for their own comfort. And this is the shepherds who are the leaders of Israel, the chief priests, scribes and Pharisees, Herod and Pilate. So there were diverse responses to Jesus' coming. Those people whose desire was to know God were excited, but there were others who were politically motivated. Some opposed him, some would have made him king by force, and he avoided them. He had come as a teacher of righteousness to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And so to Pilate he says, "I've come into the world that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth hears my voice." He is about ideas about how we should live. And if we think about the words that he says, then we will actually respond and recognize the righteousness of them. But Pilate is in a different world. He is in a political world where it's not truth but expediency that matters. So Pilate says, what is truth? How can we work out what is true and what is not? In fact, we have a conscience which helps us to understand. But if we keep overriding that conscience, then we will get to the point where we do not know what is right and what is wrong. Pilate has a little bit of integrity, for having said what is truth, he goes back out to the Jews again and says to them, I find no fault in him at all. He has not found any reason, anything that Jesus had done. There's no testimony against Jesus that would justify executing him. Now, one of the concerns in his mind is, who shall he release? Because it was a custom, as a sign of good measure to the Jews, that he would release a political prisoner at this time of year. Jesus is clearly a political prisoner because he hasn't done anything wrong. So Pilate sees the opportunity of releasing Jesus. But the most notorious alternative is a man called Barabbas. This man had led rebellion, he was a robber, he was a murderer, he deserved execution. But Pilate says, well, I give you a choice. I can release Jesus, who is innocent and hasn't done anything wrong, or I can release Barabbas. You have a custom that I should release someone to you at Passover. Do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? The crowd respond, not this man, but Barabbas. Now Barabbas was a robber. Obviously, he was a notorious criminal. It was a relief to the authorities that this man was in custody. But now the Jews say, no, the one we want you to release is an evil man. This is in line with the corruption of legal systems, that the innocent are punished and the guilty are set free. And this is exactly what is happening here. But God has a purpose and plan in it. We can continue then in chapter 19. So they took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put on him a purple robe. Then they said, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him with their hands. Pilate then went out again and said to them, Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. When we put the various accounts together, we find that Pilate went to extraordinary lengths to try and find a way to set Jesus free. He sent him off to King Herod to see what King Herod thought. Well, King Herod was excited that he might meet Jesus. He'd wanted to meet Jesus for a long time. He wanted to see a miracle. But Jesus did not answer him at all, for he did not recognize Herod's authority at all. The soldiers mistreated Jesus, mocking him. Here, he was a king. He should have a crown. Let's give him a crown of thorns. He should have a robe, a purple robe. And so they put the robe on him. They struck him. They blindfolded him and beat him. And this was all after they had scourged him. Just those few words hide a great deal of brutality against the Lord Jesus, so that his visage was marred more than any man, as the prophet had proclaimed. He was brutally beaten. And Pilate presents Jesus again. Maybe the crowd will see how Jesus has been treated and have a little bit of sympathy for him. Behold, I am bringing him out to you, that you may know that I find no fault in him. The second declaration of Jesus' innocence. Then Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, Behold the man. When the chief priests and officers saw him, they cried out, saying, Crucify him! Crucify him! And Pilate said, You take him and crucify him. I find no fault in him. The third declaration. And the Jews answered, We have a law, and concerning our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. This was the other charge that they had against Jesus. Not only was he the King of the Jews, but he was the Son of God. But they refuse to acknowledge that he actually is the Son of God. They say he claims to be the Son of God. He makes himself to be the Son of God. This is a charge of blasphemy, according to the law. Therefore, he ought to die.